All right. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to be here with everyone. It's been a conversation for so many months, so it's nice to be able to come together. I'm going to start by giving a territorial acknowledgement, and with that, offer that anyone's able to close your eyes or lower your gaze as I read through this. So I want you to all start by bringing a place to mind that feels like home to you. A space where you feel safe. Maybe you feel safe and held or grounded. And notice what it feels like to be there. The memories that come up for you, whether from a distant time where you felt home or as recent as today. And now imagine entering someone else's home. How do you move differently? What care do you take? What respect do you show? What do you notice? Being in someone else's home calls for attention and thoughtfulness. It asks us to move mindfully within it. And today, we gather on the traditional land that is home to many. We are on Treaty 1 territory, at the crossroads of the Red and Annisinaboine rivers, in a historic gathering place for the Anishinabeg, Inaniwak, Anishinawak, Dakota, Oyete, and Dene Suline, in the birthplace and homeland of the Red River Métis. This land has been cared for, lived on, and nurtured for countless generations. Every step we take here is a step into someone else's home. And as we consider this, I want you to think of your own sense of home, how it feels, what it requires from you, and how you carry that with you into other spaces. How can we honor this land, its history, and its peoples as we are held by it? It invites us into gratitude, into reflection, and accountability. It asks us to listen, to slow down, and to learn. And the land we inhabit today carries stories, responsibilities, and connections that are larger than ourselves. May we approach it with care, humility, and the willingness to act in ways that nurture our sense of home as a collective. Okay, perfect. So to start off, we wanted to do a check-in activity with everybody. A little bit of, we'll get into that. But wanted to name that after our check-in, we're going to move it through the trauma-informed lens and conflict management, critical thinking skills and nonpartisan approach, how to get involved, and then Canada and the atom bomb exhibit. So with that, we want to first start with our check-in. And what that's going to look like is turning to the person or persons next to you, doing your name, if you're comfortable, your pronouns, and what kind of energy are you bringing in this moment into this table that you're sitting at. And that could look like, if you were a car, would you be idling? Would you be in overdrive? Would the engine be running smoothly? And just taking a couple minutes, whether they're people you know or not, a practice at my work that we recognize from moment to moment. You know, there's different ways that we are sitting with ourselves that we might be identifying. So we always share our names, we always share our pronouns, and then how are we checking in? So I'll give everybody a moment to do that with each other. Okay, we're going to slowly bring everybody back. And appreciate everybody doing your check-ins. I apologize if you didn't get the full time that you wanted to name, but hopefully everyone did get their time. And moving first into our conversation around trauma and our approaches to trauma in the classroom, I want to start by naming that I won't be using the word trigger, because I do my best not to use armament language, and I think there's alternatives that we can use, like activating or activators. And that's a shift I've made intentionally. There's a potential that still happens, and there's grace when it does. And I also bring it to our attention because once we start to notice this, we might see a lot of ways that we're using armament language, violent, destructive language in our everyday lexicon. And that might look like, we pulled the trigger, someone dropped a bomb on us, we dodged a bullet, that person went AWOL. And these are all ways that we recognize that military language is coming into our everyday language, and wondering and being intentional about why we're using that language and who does it serve. So the first piece I wanted to name was around trauma awareness. Going to be breaking down approaches to trauma into 4 different areas. So trauma awareness is the foundation. It means understanding that trauma is common, that it can affect people, how they learn, how they react, and that can even be to neutral stimuli. And in our classrooms, being trauma aware might look like noticing that loud noises might impact somebody, might cause them to withdraw. And that awareness is a first step. It invites curiosity instead of judgment, and there's not an action, there's not a practical piece to that. And that's where trauma-sensitive approaches come into play. So trauma sensitivity takes awareness into practice. We move from knowing that trauma exists to anticipating and mitigating harm. So if we know sudden loud noises can activate a student, we might provide warnings before playing certain videos or using sound effects. We check in on our tone, our pacing, the predictability of what we're providing to students. And it's about subtle but intentional choices that reduce stress and build trust. The next is trauma-informed, which was in the title. And a coworker of mine, an exceptional practitioner, Mel Horvath Lucid, said that a trauma-informed approach goes beyond mere awareness of trauma, seeks to integrate this understanding into every aspect of an organization, a school board, a community. It recognizes that trauma is prevalent and can manifest in many complex ways in people's lives. And this framework acknowledges the impact that trauma has on individuals and aims to prevent re-traumatization. So it strives to create environments that actively promote healing and resilience. And summarized at the bottom, it's integrating trauma knowledge into systems, into practices, and into our relationships. And lastly is trauma-responsive practices. So being trauma-responsive is an embodied and comprehensive approach that combines principles of trauma-aware, trauma-sensitive, and trauma-informed approaches, while also embracing a dynamic aspect of proactive adaptability. And proactive adaptability refers to an individual or collective ability to shift context, to recognize emerging needs and respond to them in real time. It recognizes that individuals impacted by trauma have a unique need and that a responsive ecosystem can continually learn and grow with those folks to support them effectively. And a key part of cultivating this kind of space is that everyone comes to see themselves as a part of the ecosystem. This is not just something for the students. We are a part of the classroom, and it includes ourselves as educators. So proactive adaptability also recognizes the personal or maybe organizational limitations to ensure a calm and clear and connected language that is within and outside the scope of our practice. So an example of this looked like knowing that there are folks that come from families that are food insecure. And it's not about doing a check-in and a student saying, I'm hungry. It's recognizing that trauma is experienced by folks across the board, and understanding that might look like allotting a certain amount of funds towards having some snacks in the classroom. It's not to have a student name, I'm hungry, and give them a granola bar. It's having a community that, of course, perhaps the educators keep the threshold of having some granola bars, but opening that up to the classroom of students being able to give and take from that place, for parents to understand that that's something that's happening across classrooms, so that there's not a singling out, there's not a shame to it. It's that we're a community and we support each other, and there's ways that we can respond to those needs because we are trauma aware, and including those practices within our systems and understanding that that might be different every day, and there's certain elements that you're including in your classroom that respond to those needs. Now, there are not rigid categories of now I am a trauma-informed practitioner, now I am trauma-aware. It's a living spectrum, and you might be trauma-aware in a certain aspect, you might be trauma-sensitive in another, trauma-informed in another. But for example, you might recognize that the loud noises are something that's triggering a student, or activating a student. And that's the awareness aspect. And that might be one practice you have, and there's so many different practices we can include. So it's not that now I am trauma aware, I am approaching my classroom with trauma awareness. And this isn't a goal, it's a growth that we continually do together. Now, a simple piece of being trauma-informed, an approach that we've used within our work, as Sarah had mentioned, I work for a restorative justice organization. Used to work with caregivers and teens in a program where we got referrals from Family and Children's Services, and now work with youth and adults navigating the criminal legal system. And in the conversations when we come together, there's always a check-in. Similar to what you did today, there might be an energy check. Do you have the capacity to be in this room to have the conversation that needs to take place? And the check-ins and check-outs can be really helpful, and mid-check-ins throughout the class. And it's really just to get an understanding of where folks are at. And that can look different depending on your classroom, depending on the subject you teach, how you want to approach that. But a place that students are able to come and name how they're coming into the space. And with that, maybe needs that are named as well. And in setting up a trauma-informed space, we can consider developing shared guidelines together. Before we have conversations around conflict, we tend to work with the folks that we're with, whether it's youth, adults, or youth and adults together, to have those conflict conversations around shared guidelines. What is valued by the folks that are in the room? And that has been a way of actually having buy-in for those individuals to even want to have a conversation together, because they recognize, oh, you actually value this as well. And that's really important, especially when we're building a narrative of another person and who they are and why they're coming into the room. It can be really helpful when folks name what they value and see the crossover. Another aspect of actually this is a really neat thing. I don't have a picture of it, but they're called GROK cards, G-R-O-K. They're feelings and needs cards, and there's actually ones for classrooms, like larger cards. We use them all the time and find youth really enjoy using them. It's been a way that we've been able to open up conversations where some folks were quite timid in having conversations. And that's another way that you can do a check-in. Choose one of the words, like, what do you need today? One need, one feeling, and how does that look for you today? Another is trauma-informed aspect is the transparency and honesty. So recognizing that check-ins can also be vulnerable, and people are going to come into them in different ways. But there's a risk in naming how you are and how you're coming into the room. So that's courageous. As folks coming into the room as educators, it can be a vulnerable place, but also a way that you can model what that looks like so folks feel more comfortable. And yeah, predictability. So similar to this presentation, we had an agenda of what's happening. There can be that conversation of this is what's happening in the next class. We know that predictability is something that is incredibly necessary when we're working with folks who have experienced trauma. And since we are not going to ask every single person we meet, what kind of trauma have you experienced, it's good practice to be able to offer predictability within what we're offering in the classroom. And that can be especially the case when we're planning to have a difficult conversation, perhaps nuclear weapons or otherwise, that folks have that awareness so they can ask questions ahead of time if they have them. They can talk to their classmates. They can build different coping strategies of maybe taking a walk before they even come in the room. There's different ways that they can prepare themselves. Last is voice and choice. So in what ways are individuals becoming emotionally literate to be able to learn to recognize, name, and express their feelings? If content becomes too heavy for them, what kinds of choices are offered? Is an individual able to stand if they're feeling discomfort sitting? Are they able to leave and take a walk? Are there other choices that Are there other choices that allow for you to feel trust still in that relationship and allow that action to take place? And yeah, this one's an important one because I think creativity comes into it. Again, it depends on the space you have and the students you're in relationship with, but being able to be creative, and that could be a part of the shared guidelines of what happens when a difficult conversation comes into play and we need something, what that looks like as a classroom. And next is something called access vulnerability. So again, it's around naming needs, and it's how as educators can we be honest and vulnerable and responsible and accountable to support the folks that we're with in the room. And again, this was from a really wonderful conversation that I had with a colleague, and it was helpful because a lot of the times we do check-ins and we ask folks to be honest and vulnerable. How are you showing up in the room? But what does it look like to also be responsible and accountable? Sometimes we'll come into a space and it's like, I'm feeling really anxious. And when we meet that, sometimes like if someone shares that with me, I feel a little bit of an onus of how do I meet them where they're at? What can I do actually to support that? And there's nothing wrong with that. But when we're sharing that with someone, we have to acknowledge that there's some accountability and responsibility of also understanding and meeting our own needs. So as an educator, if we're coming in the room and being honest, which I think is wonderful of, this is actually a difficult day for me. What ways are you expressing that you're also meeting your own needs? So if I'm feeling under the weather, you can name that, and I actually have my tea here as well, and that's something that will help my throat, and I'm gonna have some snacks because I'm actually feeling low energy. And demonstrating to the students what it looks like to meet your own needs. And of course, there can always be the ask of, and I have kind of a little bit of a headache. I'm wondering if we could work together to maybe have quieter voices today. And that can be something of requesting support, but really when it comes to conversations around boundaries, that is meeting our own need. So how can we do that in the classroom? And these are just some examples of what we offer to the youth that we work with. They're the exact same pieces that are on the grok cards, but just written out. And sometimes it can be really helpful when individuals are not feeling like they have the language to be able to even pick out different choices. Classroom culture, setting and intention. I think what I want to say about this is that sometimes when we share what we need, there can be a conversation around whether we're being collaborative or whether we're being accommodating and potentially a bit hierarchical in the way that we respond. So when people name what they need, is there a collaboration and a genuine curiosity of how can we work on this together to figure it out? Or is there accommodating of, oh, you named you're hungry, here's a granola bar? Instead of allowing folks to name and understand what they need and how they can meet those needs. And a student who comes to class might feel more empowered by the collaborative approach of just a curiosity and conversation about what that looks like. So if it's predictable, it's preventable. A part of being able to show up in the classroom is probably something you all know, but understanding ourselves first. So how are we determining our baseline energy? How do we understand our temperament, our attitude, the different things that activate us, and being able to identify those so that when they do happen, we understand the different methods to take care of ourselves. And that includes in the difficult conversations that we want to have with students. So in our work, we use physiological signs, coping strategies, and self-care, and what that looks like with the youth and the adults that I've worked with is what are the different signs that we know that we're going into fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And that can be incredibly helpful, and I know it's been helpful for me in spaces of like, oh, my breath is actually getting pretty shallow. I'm starting to shake. What are the things that I can do to be able to help myself and meet those needs? And I think something that is talked about a lot is we need to be regulated. We always need to be regulated. It's not good to be dysregulated. And I would also argue that there's something really important about understanding why we're dysregulated and the information that it gives us. It's just, do we have the appropriate spaces where we can feel dysregulated? And then also something we work through, this is a full chart, but we normally have this as reference, and there's a coping strategies plan. So do you have distractions that help you when you're managing difficult time, managing conflict? Are there things that you can do for releasing, for relaxation, for grounding, and ways that students can understand when they're in a difficult place? What are the coping strategies that they can use to manage those conversations effectively? And lastly, a self-care wheel. I know self-care is, I don't know, I would say shoved down our throats quite a lot. And something that I've found helpful is this wheel, because I've looked at it in ways of what am I already doing, and what wedges of these are there pieces that are absent, and what would I like to fill that with? Because if I notice that things are out of balance, maybe there's a really strong professional way that you're managing your self-care, but there's something lacking in the personal. What's something that could be useful to try? Yeah, and something that I just wanted to share quickly and was there's so many different breathing exercises out there. A recent one that we learned about was bud to flower. So really like breathing out and moving into the hand shape of a flower and moving back in and breathing in or breathing out for 4. And the purpose of this was actually from a podcast, Trauma-Informed Educators podcast I was listening to. And the educator named that when they're feeling a little bit dysregulated, when they need a little bit of calm, this is the exercise they do with their entire class, because there's ways that we can meet our needs with the collective, whether they join in or not, but so that we can continue to move forward in the classroom. And then one of my colleagues named, I don't know if any of you had seen the Hoberman sphere where it gets larger and goes in and out. They were actually naming that in their practice. They use that with a collective group to do a breathing exercise. So as you breathe it, as you bring it out, everyone's breathing in, and as you bring it together, everyone's breathing out. And there's no words that are necessary. People just start to go with the rhythm that you're using that ball. And now, yeah, these are a bunch of different slides, different strategies, different examples. We've really actually talked about quite a lot of it. How do we promote safety? How are there ways that we create those practices of self-regulation? Are there conversations that are taking place around that? Setting up classroom behavioral expectations, promoting positive classroom climate. What are short rules? What are simple rules that you have as a group? And allowing that shared guideline to be a living document. Is it working for us, or is it causing more issues that we created this rule? And it's something that can be changed and come back to, because every day we're showing up with a different capacity, a different ability to perhaps meet the needs that we have. Discussing and assessing students' needs, discuss that. And lastly, just wanted to highlight the strategy to ensure that different cultural identity groups and perspectives are represented in your classroom and instruction. And I think we've been talking about it a thread throughout this entire summit so far. And I think one that I find myself in conversation with people a lot. And around that, something I would share with you to look up is not just how can we look at these difficult conversations through a lens of some folks name that there's a necessity for impartiality, but what I would name is there space for multi-partiality? Is there a way that we can recognize that there are multiple stories and there are experiences that are valid from each side, and how do we acknowledge those pieces, those power imbalances, when we're entering these kinds of conversations, so that everyone can come together to have these conversations. Yeah, and conflict. So as I named, if conflict does occur around those difficult conversations, what are ways that we can return to the shared guidelines, see if they're working? What are ways that we can check in with each other and see how that's working for us? And this conversation around discomfort versus a threat to safety. I hear my sister is a child and youth worker, and I have many friends that are teachers and educators. And a conversation that's taken place is the large amount of violence that is being experienced by educators from students. And so I'm not naming that these techniques and approaches are going to remove a threat to safety. That is very real. And there's a lot of classrooms where it happens over and over again. So when there's acknowledgement that there might be a threat to safety, that a student might throw a chair, is that a conversation that can take place around the shared guidelines? We acknowledge that this is going to happen and what's going to happen when that happens. So there's actually predictability around that threat to safety. So the students know what's going to happen if someone throws a chair. The student who throws a chair understands what's going to happen in that classroom. And then that proactive adaptability of recognizing that every situation is going to be different. It might not be an answer for every situation, but what ways can we move with the needs of the classroom and understand that sometimes we can have difficult conversations and that can be uncomfortable, and there's real areas where we're having conversations and then there might be a threat to safety that takes place. And there's also limitations. So what does it look like in the classroom to consider these limitations? Being trauma-informed in the classroom doesn't mean that we are processing students' trauma. It means that we're creating conditions to feel safe and support learning. And this includes knowing our own boundaries, when to pause the lesson, when to refer a student to additional support, and how to hold our role with compassion while protecting ourselves and the students. And we also need to consider the limitations that might affect engagement, and that might be folks that don't have their basic needs met. That might be individuals who are experiencing ongoing abuse and neglect. And it's not to paint a broad stroke that anyone who's experiencing abuse can't show up for a difficult conversation. But again, it's that proactive adaptability of acknowledging that some students might come into the space and be unable to have a difficult conversation that day, and what are the ways that we can meet them where they're at. And yeah, I think we've talked about it throughout, but also capacity. Where's your capacity, and how do you understand your capacity coming into the classroom? So the last question I have is, what ways do you engage with trauma-sensitive, informed, aware, and or responsive practice in your classroom, if you're open to sharing?
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Ali. I use so much of what you've taught me, and it's just, yeah, there are no words. Thank you. Great. My name is Linda Kalafatides. I'm a classroom teacher in Toronto, and I've had the privilege of teaching many different courses in many different departments. That's given me an incredible opportunity to explore what students care about in those many disciplines and respond to that in different ways. And over time, I found that there were certain strategies, certain tools that really resonated and really responded well to what the students cared about. So I'd like to share just a few of those with you today. They're very hands-on, very in-class practical things. I've even got rubrics to go with them. So I hope that one or more of these will be helpful for any educators here and maybe students as well. The first one I'm going to talk about is the cue chart question. Some people may be familiar with cue chart questions. A regular question might be, what color is the leaf? A cue chart question is a tool for diving more deeply into an issue, getting students to think higher order thinking, create higher order questions, and really explore, really develop research and inquiry skills. This is from a page from a book that all our school libraries and our board have, Research Success. It looks kind of boring, but has been one of the most incredible tools I've ever used. At the very bottom, you'll see 6 check marks. I took those 6 check marks and turned them into a rubric so students could see as they worked through their questions and developed questions, whether they satisfied the criteria, whether they were indeed questions that led to more questions and deeper or higher thinking. It's a very simple concept. You take a word from the first column, who, what, when, where, why, how, and add the second word. So instead of asking a question that could be answered with a yes or no, you're diving much more deeply. This is an example of a chart I threw together where younger students, or junior students, can use check marks to see if they've satisfied the criteria. And more senior students, grade 11, grade 12, for instance, my grade 12 equity students, could write detailed notes inside those boxes. And sometimes I would put this onto an 11 by 17, so it was extra large and left a lot of room for writing. A couple of examples of questions that the students came up with. How might a book or movie influence how citizens regard nuclear weapons? How can a culture of war shift to a culture of peace? Or, as we've seen, vice versa. This has been really, really effective, and the students have responded very well to it. They often work in groups, and it's very rare I get anything back that doesn't have a box filled in. Another strategy or tool is a causal model. This has the distinction of being, well, my favorite for a reason, because for some reason or another, it gets every student out of their chair and grabbing a marker or a piece of chalk and going up to the board or the paper and adding a bubble. And the concept is you put an issue in the middle. I have the students come up with an issue related to whatever subject that we're talking about, and just to ensure that it's something that they care about, they can relate to. And the sky is the limit. The boards and the pieces of paper are never large enough to accommodate all of their ideas as they explore causes and effects. So you can imagine that in the context of studying peace, violence, nuclear weapons, the expansion of bubbles, which the only thing you can get wrong is maybe having an arrow go the wrong way, for instance, putting the effect first and then the cause. They just explore endlessly. And once again, for some reason, I've never had anybody sit through this without getting up and grabbing a piece of chalk, even the student who is the least engaged. It's just got that magical quality that I really wanted to share with you today. So the causal model explores cause and effect. It's a type of brainstorming activity where students identify connections and explore a myriad of facets of complex real-world issues. In this example, students explored the causes and effects of mercury poisoning at Grassy Narrows. Imagine a causal model where students explore the consequences of excluding women's voices from a student council meeting at their high school, or a national meeting on foreign policy. And because teachers love to have the rubrics done, a colleague and I put this together according to the system of evaluating through thinking, application, communication, and knowledge. I have some copies. Strategy 3, ladder of inference. I learned about this at the Rotman School of Management. It was a course for teachers, and it just blew me away. It was so effective. The data pool at the bottom is explained by this wonderful middle school teacher, Beth Grosso. The video of her teaching her class has since been lost on YouTube, unfortunately. Even Rotmans was not able to help me retrieve it. But there are a few 30-second clips available, and you can see her style. And what she's done is described a situation where this boy comes into school, and he's stomping his feet, and he's slamming the door. And what she's done has turned these into what she calls fish facts. So these are pieces of data that belong in the data pool, and everyone is witnessing. But then she describes what happened to that boy first thing in the morning over breakfast. And that fish fact is, you can sort of see it. You see some seaweed behind her right shoulder. That fish is hiding behind the seaweed. So people are noticing the obvious stomping of the feet and the slamming of the door. And they are making assumptions. They're kind of jumping up the ladder, jumping to conclusions, as it were, because they're only seeing certain pieces of data. And depending on our experiences, which Beth Grosso calls our suitcase of experience, what they are our schema, people make different conclusions, jump to different conclusions from different pools of data or different elements in that pool, different fish facts. We select different fish facts. We get on the internet and we can type in the same thing as somebody else in, south of the border or in another province, get a different set of data presented to us. And so students really begin to develop empathy, understanding, as well as multiple points of view and how we arrive at multiple points of view through this lesson on ladder of inference. So this is a little poster I've got here as well, and it's from Rotman's I Think program, which you can learn more about on their website. Just an incredible tool for whatever we end up talking about in class and researching and understanding that the data we collect and form our opinions about can be very different and lead to different conclusions and different actions. So I'm going to move on because I could talk about that forever. How do I evaluate ladder of inference exercises? Through discussions and visual aids, students critically evaluate each step working backwards. So you look at the conclusions, you look at the decisions that people have arrived at, and you work backwards down the ladder. Examine the conclusions, scrutinize any assumptions or jumps to conclusions, and question the data that activated the inquiry. The ladder of inference models are mental processes, from observing and selecting facts to take action. It's shaped by our past experiences and biases, aka our suitcase of experiences or our schema. It is a wonderful tool for considering multiple points of view and building empathy. Starting from the fish facts swimming in the data pool, students witness how different conclusions can be arrived at by selecting or not seeing certain fish. The Pro-Pro model. A Pro-Pro model is a tool for creating a new model where two existing models experience some sort of tension between them. How would this tool be useful in disarmament education? There's an amazing series on TVO called Striking Balance. Striking Balance explores in multiple episodes some environmental biosphere. It focuses on a biosphere where you have strong tensions between stakeholders. For instance, you have a military base, you've got farmers, you've got fishers, you've got cottagers, you've got an environmental problem that is changing everything. It takes those stakeholders and it illustrates these two models, or these multiple models, and then explores the tension between them. What is the problem between what the farmers want and what the fishers want? And then creates not a compromise, but a new model. It takes the best of everything and creates a new model. I really encourage you to watch that series. It's absolutely wonderful. My students explored this. You'll see it in the next slide. This is a simpler example. My students really wanted to learn more about anti-violence, about violence, about what they could do about violence, and how to advocate for peace. And so they were getting some great material in after-school programs. They were getting some great stuff when a guest speaker came at lunchtime. The curriculum encouraged, or the teachers were encouraged to infuse anti-violence education in their disciplines. But those things were not a perfect model. And so they came up with the idea of a curricular anti-violence course, which came from them and was extremely successful, I think, because it did come from them. This is the example of the stakeholders and a solution, a Pro-Pro model from one of the TV episodes. A couple slides later, I'll show you a document that helped us create that course. So, how do I assess critical thinking? It seems like a tough one, and it's not a straightforward answer, but there are some amazing tools to do so. So triangulation is one of my favorite ways to assess critical thinking. As you can see, there are a bunch of ways to converse, to have conversations with students, many ways to observe, speaking, process folio, a list of books, and products, many types of products. The student who did this for one of the art projects that we were doing, if I hadn't had conversation with that student, if I hadn't observed, if I hadn't sat down with him at length, which I know is not always possible, but is always valuable, I think that he might not have passed that assignment. But when I actually had a conversation about him and he explained what he was doing, blew me away. Not only did he satisfy all the criteria, he got the best mark in the class. He had hit every one of those pieces of criteria. He just hadn't done it in a way that you could really discern without that conversation. Once again, an extremely useful rubric. Again, I have several copies. This is from a fabulous book on research and inquiry. It's got about 35 rubrics at the back of it that are reproducible, and they are amazing. As you can see, it's got a column for products, observations, and conversations. These are conventional courses, subject courses in schools, in curricula across the country. We've got social studies, grade 10, the genocide studies course, which is at the grade 12 level, social justice, grade 12. And so these are curricular infusions where disarmament education really fits well with the overall and specific expectations for those courses. In my experience, I've been able to find materials to really help me in many different disciplines. And this is the book, this is the guideline that I was talking about that allowed us to create the anti-violence course that came from the students. It's an interdisciplinary course, draws on overall expectations from multiple courses. They engender transdisciplinary skills. TDSB students were able to create a course that combined the expectations of English, history, media arts, and gender studies to create a curricular course on peace and advocacy. I was wondering if Manitoba has an interdisciplinary study option. It does? Fantastic. It's amazing because it's such a responsive tool for listening to what the students need, care about, and all of those jobs that they're going to have we don't even know exist yet, right? It's just it's probably one of my favorite resources ever. These are resources I found particularly helpful. The grade 10 English in Ontario really delves into World War I and World War II. And these two books on the bottom left, the second one is a graphic novel version of the first. Never Silent is a brand new book by Hiroshima survivor Setsuko Thurlow, and is a wonderful grade 7 to grade 9 or ESL higher up students. Excellent brand new resource. Tough Guys is older, but one of those things that just helps so effectively in critical thinking. It really focuses on violence and our media. The last one is by Ray Atchison, and is an excellent document that explores gender and disarmament and fossil fuels. Here are a few pictures of some things that relate to teaching visual and media arts. That's an amazing gallery we're going to talk about in a moment, and we got permission to take some excerpts from the gallery that was at the Toronto City Hall, and we've got 10 beautiful laminated pieces from that photo essay for you to look at here on the edge of the stage. The banner idea for visual arts, I absolutely love. This particular one, which we've got here, has traveled thousands of kilometers. Imagine students doing a banner in visual arts, or any course really, even a club, and then tracking its progress. This one was on a peace walk in Nova Scotia, September 2024, that we walked with from Pugwash to Halifax. And imagine everyone who holds that banner signing it or leaving some sort of mark or record of the kilometers it's traveled on the back of the banner. On the bottom right is a stained glass picture that connects to disarmament. So these are 4 resources that can be used. I haven't used the 4th one yet, as I only just watched it, but right away saw that it had applications in the grade 11 media arts curriculum, which focuses on point of view. It's from 3 points of view. But after watching it and doing some research, I realized that the directors really weren't talking about the points of view that the movie shows. They talked about how they just wanted to get people talking. They just wanted to start the conversation about nuclear weapons and the possibilities of taking us to the brink and what could be done about it. So all of the readings that I did, all the interviews that I read had to do with, they just wanted that conversation. It had less to do with the curriculum, things that matched our curriculum. Canada, the Atom Bomb is that gallery I spoke of. There are 72 frames. Each one comes with pieces of information, and they address the Indigenous experience at Port Radium, which I think to the last student nobody's ever heard of. And this gallery really opened up that world for them, the Indigenous experience of the mining of uranium. Oppenheimer, I had my students respond to this so unexpectedly. We used the Q chart question chart to ask questions as to why Christopher Nolan, the director, did not address any of the Indigenous or Japanese experiences in his film. The range of answers I got as students created Q chart questions to that effect and wrote anywhere from 1 sentence to 5 paragraphs. Just, it was very, very meaningful. And not all the same answers, not all the same opinions. Very, very independent thinking and exploration of what they thought about why Christopher Nolan made that choice. When you buy the DVD, there's a second DVD with a bunch of interviews. So we were able to watch some interviews with Christopher Nolan and kind of get into his head a little bit. So, and Village of Widows, which addresses the Indigenous experience. I have had a lot of amazing opportunities to explore what the students care about, and I love that they are so open with me about what they care about. It's allowed me to share tools with them and with other teachers that have really enhanced my ability to teach disarmament education, and I feel so privileged and grateful for that. Thank you so much. I hope something I shared with you today might resonate with your classes. Ali, did you want to take over?
Yeah, so as you can see, this banner is actually from our disarmament education program. We've offered workshops for the Toronto District School Board on the Peace Walk that Linda mentioned in Nova Scotia at different high schools along the way. And we're working to create a website, disarmamenteducation.ca. You will see when you get there that says launching soon, because it's a work in progress. And we would love for you to be able to join the Canadian Disarmament Education Network for ways of knowing when our workshops are taking place. If you want to receive or contribute to lesson plans for integrating disarmament education into your curriculum, and also a way for educators just to network with each other or things that are working in your classroom to learn with each other. Is there something you want added to that? Oh, yes, and the Google group that you can be added to so that there can be those conversations that take place with the different educators. Yeah, are there any questions? So the first thing that comes to mind, I don't have a visual of it, but a model that we talk about is called the intent action effect model. And it's understanding that our intentions and the impact that our actions have are unseen until we be able to have a communication about it. And in that, in not being able to have those conversations, there's a lot of meaning making that goes in our head, right? Of who that person is, why they're doing what they're doing, and or on the greater scale of why we need nuclear weapons or why my family needs to stay in the military. There's lots of conversations that could be had around that. And so what comes to mind is, of course, one of the pieces of setting the culture in your room is an intention. As an educator, what is your intention of teaching X, Y, and Z? And, as you named, there can be impacts regardless if we had good intentions or not on folks. And I don't think that's a reason to refrain from having those conversations. I think it's a way to build more understanding and setting up spaces to be able to learn what that impact has on someone. Because there are real experiences, those are real people's lives. And it's not to shame or cause an immediate shift in that conversation, but what are the ways that we can understand and name what our intentions are around the conversation and leave space for the impact that it has on the folks that we're having conversations with, if that feels, yeah.
That's good.
Okay. Is there anything else? Does that feel like I answered what your question was? Absolutely. Yeah, so we encourage all the educators that are here to come to us. We're happy to add you to our Google group to have those conversations of not only what went well, but what's challenging and how can we support each other through that. I know we're at time. Quickly going to name that we have the pictures of the exhibit up here, also resources, and on the end there's 2 resources. They are different books around disarmament education, audio